Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to this press conference with Herminio Blanco of Mexico. Mr. Blanco will give a brief opening statement and then we'll take your questions. Again, we only have 30 minutes, so I would ask that you limit yourself to one question in the interests of time and fairness. Senor Blanco, you have the floor, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I will speak very, very briefly. I know the most important part of these sort of meetings is your questions and potentially my answer to your questions. So just very briefly, I gave them an assessment of the successes of this organization, the challenges that this organization is facing, and the way forward. Much of that analysis, I'm sure you have listened from other candidates, so I will not repeat my perception of that. But obviously, I would be extremely open to answer your questions. I think that what I do want to say, using this great opportunity of all this important media present in the room today, is to summarize the assets that I think I would bring to this organization. Well, first of all, I was a minister in the government of Mexico, a country that has been always a very constructive player in the WTO. I was a minister during a period in which Mexico faced great difficulties, and I was part of the cabinet that, under the leadership of President Zedillo, managed to bring the country back from a severe crisis into growth and generation of employment. I was the head, either as chief negotiator of NAFTA, which was a first agreement between the U.S. and the developing country, and an agreement that set a template for the agreements that the United States negotiated then with the countries of Central America, with Chile, with other countries. The same was with the first negotiation that the EU undertook with Latin America. We were the first, and we also established with the EU a template for the negotiations that the EU did then with Central America and other countries in our hemisphere. Together with that experience, successful experience of bringing very difficult negotiations with big countries, I also have the experience of negotiating with small countries. We negotiated with countries such as Nicaragua, Bolivia, we negotiated with Costa Rica, and as you may imagine, it requires different skills, capacity to understand the reality of a small country, and the creativeness to find the modalities to finish a negotiation with a small country. In addition, and I think this could be a great asset for the WTO, I have been 12 years in the private sector as member of important boards in Mexico, boards of companies outside of Mexico, as a member of advisory boards of different corporations, as consultant for companies in Mexico and outside Mexico, small and big companies, helping them deal with the challenges of trading across borders and investing in Mexico, and Mexican companies investing in the rest of the world. And besides that, I am also the chairman of a company that every day analyzes the measures taken by different governments, the most important governments of Latin America, and the partners in trade of Latin America. We analyze the impact that those measures taken have over the companies operating in Latin America. I do believe that the fact that I have been in the private sector as a user of the free trade agreements, as a user of the disciplines embedded in the multilateral system, embedded in this great organization, the World Trade Organization, gives me a different advantage point to look at how this organization has to move so as to respond to the great challenges that are faced by the private sector in this new era of different business, of new modes of production, where the trade in services has become so important. That experience, I think, could be very important in bringing more closeness between what happens here in Geneva and what happens in the main countries in the world, in the private sector, so that whatever is negotiated here in Geneva reflects the reality of how business is done in the world. I think that that is a big asset, especially since at this point in time, when the credibility of this great organization is being questioned, especially by the private sectors of the world. I have talked to representatives of the private sector of different countries, and they see that these 12 years, without having had the solution for this negotiation, they see that as something is going fundamentally wrong in WTO. And that's something that I don't think is useful for anybody in this world. And so I believe that also the relations that I have with the private sector in Mexico and in many countries in the world may be also a useful asset to communicate to them the achievements of this organization once that we go beyond the 9th Ministerial Conference. I will keep my comments to that and open up for questions.
The first question is for Gabriela. Surprisingly.
Gabriela Sotomayor, Mexican News Agency, Notimex. Señor Blanco.
Mr. Blanco, if you were to become Director General of this body during the first year of your mandate, what would be your priorities? Well, during the first year, as you know fully well, the next Director General would start on the 1st of September. And the first enormous challenge of this organization is that at the ministerial meeting to be held in Bali, there must be positive results, a package which responds to interests, both developing countries' interests and developed countries' interests. But in a very important way, what is important is it must send out a message to the world. That is that things can be done here in Geneva, and that this organization can come to agreements, and that this organization can move forward. I think that is fundamental. Now, arriving here at this institution on the 1st of September, clearly many months will have gone by, where the technical work, at least, by the 1st of September should, if not finished, nearly finished, so that the only thing left to do are the political decisions which have to be taken by the ambassadors. And if there is no convergency between ambassadors here in Geneva, would be to help these ambassadors. For instance, I could travel with them to capital to try and find the flexibilities required, so that in Bali we have a first success which changed perceptions within the organization. Quite clearly, no organization which has gone through 12 years of negotiations, frustrated negotiations, can have the most optimistic views from the inside or from the outside. So that is the first challenge. And this would be the first important piece of work I would start up as of the 1st of September.
This question is for Fernando and then to Ravi. Fernando, you have the floor.
Fernando Pucho, la Agencia EFE.
From Mr. Blanco, do you believe that you will gain the support of the United States? Have you had any conversations or contacts with Washington? We have met with many countries, and we're going to meet with even more countries. I know that in this selection process, which will start on the 1st of May, we'll have to go through different stages. We have understood that the stages have still not been decided. We, of course, meeting with all governments to explain to them what our perception is of what is necessary and what should be done here in Geneva, and what we believe we could bring to this organization to sort of really face up to this enormous challenge, that is the negotiation of the Doha round. And just as important as the Doha round is the solving of new issues which are becoming somewhat old today, but they are issues which have to push this organization to remaining relevant in the face of this enormous network of free trade agreements which exist in the world today.
Question now is to Ravi, followed by Assis Morera. Ravi, you have the floor.
Mr. Blanco, you would, if you are selected as the Director General, you'll take over on the 1st of September, as you have rightly said. Assuming that there is a worst-case scenario in which the entire Bali package is collapsed because of deep disagreements, because of failure to give and take between key players, you will enter on 1st of September. You have roughly 2 months. From your past experiences and with your lack of knowledge about Geneva and the forests and the trees here, how would you actually go about in the next 2 months to salvage the Bali meeting?
Well, first of all, I'd like to tell you that I do have the knowledge. I'm not a participant of the day-to-day negotiations, but as I said, through our company, Ecom, we do have a day-to-day analysis of whatever happens. And unfortunately, not many things have happened here in Geneva. So I am aware of everything that's going on. You're asking a hypothetical question of something that could be a game changer.
Sorry, sir. Based on 12 years of experience.
No, I know. I understand. I will answer your question. I think it's a very good question. It's just going to the worst case scenario. And, worst case scenario, some things happen. But I will tell you that my sense and the message that I sent to the ambassadors is that maybe in the past people have used the expression of this negotiation is fundamental for WTO. If we don't solve this negotiation, the future of WTO will be in doubt. I think that most countries must feel that even trying to get a concrete package, a package in which in many of the, at least on the topics of the trade facilitation, there cannot be a lot of space in which there are full, big disagreements. There bringing positions with respect to that and with respect to the other topics of agriculture that are being talked about. I'm not saying that the package has already been defined. I believe that in capitals, the leaders of the different countries will be faced, and if necessary, even if it would be an uphill struggle. If by September the 1st we still don't have the basis for an agreement at the technical level and the spaces for political movements are identified, if that worst case scenario happens, obviously I will dedicate myself to try to move political positions and convince the heads of state of the players that could be at the contentious positions that indeed having a failure in Bali would be a game changer for WTO.
Assis, you have the floor.
Assis Moreira, Valor.
Assis Moreira from Economic Value, Valor Econômica, São Paulo.
This discussion concerning exchange rate coming to WTO. Do you agree with negotiations to the creation of a mechanism to avoid or to compensate the artificial manipulation of currencies that has impact on trade?
Well, I do believe that first of all, in the sense of governance in the world, exchange rate must be dealt with by those countries that have the tools to deal with them. And specifically, as you know, the IMF is the appropriate fora to deal with that type of questions. So I do believe that bringing that topic into WTO would be highly divisive, and furthermore, in the worst case scenario that they could be brought in, it would be also a door, very wide door, that would be open to protectionism. So in summary, I do believe that the question of overvalue or undervalue currency have to be dealt with in the IMF. It is a difficult question. There are a lot of technicalities. Some exchange rates may be undervalued with respect to a country and overvalued with respect to another country. So it is quite complex, and it should be dealt with by the experts on that topic, which is the IMF. And that bringing many considerations into the WTO, such as exchange rate, may overwhelm the agenda here and may introduce protectionist measures into WTO.
Next question. Marie-Noël, vous avez la parole. Allez-y.
Marie-Noël Blessine of the IFP. I'd like to know why you think you're going to be successful when nothing has worked in the last 12 years. Why would you be able to change this and to get the Doha impasse removed so that the negotiations could move forward?
Well, I understand that 12 years of a negotiation imply that this is not an easy negotiation. I have been involved in very difficult negotiation. I was involved in the Uruguay right negotiation. Actually, my first trip abroad when I was Vice Minister of Foreign Trade in Mexico was to Montreal in 1988 to what was supposed to be the mid-term ministerial meeting. And we worked on that until 1994, and we finally got a solution. So I know that there are difficult questions. I know that there are very difficult issues. But I also know that when you have so many topics in a negotiation, a stumbling block in one of the groups may send signals from capitals that progress in all other groups should be blocked. So it may appear as a highly complicated and complex negotiation. It may be complex, but the complication can be solved, as soon as you start getting solutions for the main stumbling blocks, positions in other groups will be flexibilized. Why do I believe I can do this when others have not been able to do up to now? Well, I think conditions have changed. I think I bring several assets that I already mentioned. I've been in very difficult negotiations. I have a clear and useful contact with the private sector of many countries, which you very well know. If they are not involved, governments are not involved. If they don't get flexible, governments will not get flexible. So I think that I bring the desire, the conviction, and the vision that WTO is fundamental, and that this negotiation, as any other negotiation, must have a solution. Maybe not the perfect solution that was envisioned when the Doha round was launched, but a substantive package could be obtained, and I will dedicate all my skills, my strength, my creativeness to achieve that.
Jerry, the next question's to you, please.
My name is Jerry Hagstrom. I write the Hagstrom Report and for National Journal in Washington, and I'm visiting in Geneva. While I've been here, people have said to me many times that the big problem here is that when the Doha round was launched, the more traditional trading countries were the big powers, and now in the last 12 years, China, India, and Brazil have become so much more important, and that's why it's so difficult to solve these problems. How do you see the integration of these and any other countries that you think have emerged in the last 12 years, and how would you deal with them?
Well, one of the things that I said in answering the questions of some of the ambassadors is that certainly there has been a very useful concept here in Geneva in reference to developing countries and least developed countries, but that within the characterization of developing countries, there are countries that, because of their dimension, because of their progress, have been called emerging economies for some reason, and that any solution to the Doha round will require these larger countries, obviously Mexico too as an emerging economy, to do more than the rest of the developing countries. I do believe that everybody will have to play a more active role, that flexibilities have to be shown by developing countries and by emerging economies.
We have time for one more question. Dan Prusen.
Mr. Blanco, Daniel Prusen with BNA. You said in your remarks that the failure in Bali would be a game changer for the WTO. We've heard years from now how the failure of Doha will basically be the end of this organization. It'll be a catastrophe. Nevertheless, the history shows that world trade has done quite well without a Doha agreement, that trade initiatives are moving forward. Your country is involved in the TPP. You're also involved in the services plurilateral. Obviously, your government has decided that there is a future in trade negotiations. It's just not here. So shouldn't we lay to rest the idea, this sort of crying wolf, that Doha is the end-all of the WTO and move on?
Well, you know, it is for sure that the WTO has been a very successful organization. I said that in my remarks some minutes or an hour ago. It's for sure that there are a lot of good things happening in this organization, but the sheer fact that you're mentioning, that there are many free trade agreements that have been negotiated, and two very important initiatives One of them pretty advanced, which is the TPP, which is now at a stage in which major decisions may be taken by the participants in this negotiation, and the potential of the agreement between the US and EU. What would they mean for the WTO? Well, certainly WTO will not get destroyed. However, what one is seeing is that the importance, the resources, the interest of the private sectors of the world is not anymore concentrated in Geneva. It is concentrated on those agreements. And that is what is dangerous. It is dangerous because this organization is losing relevance. If Bali doesn't have a positive outcome that would change perspective, the private sector will be even more convinced that this organization is not the way to move their interest in the world, and they should concentrate in the TPP, and they should concentrate in the Atlantic Alliance, and in any other free trade agreement. That would be making the WTO irrelevant for business. And at the end of the day, trade is not an objective by itself. Trade is a way to generate jobs, and the way that you generate jobs is by having rules which are coherent, rules which are transparent, rules that are permanent, that invite companies to invest and generate jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Blanco. Thanks to all of you. Just an announcement. Tomorrow, 11:30 in this room, Taeho Park of Korea will have his press conference. Thank you very much and good night.